This video was brought to you by Blinkist. Hello friends, my name is JJ, and as we all know, right now many countries around the world are in the process of reevaluating some of their official symbols. Protesters, activists, and politicians alike are taking a hard second look at things like statues and the names of buildings, and demanding we either change or scrap emblems and monuments that are seen to be too infused with racial or cultural bigotry to work as symbols of unity in diverse societies. In America in particular, this moment has brought fresh attention to a number of state flags. I would say that there are 5 state flags in particular that we can imagine will probably either be scrapped or significantly modified in the next couple of years, or at the very least will just become increasingly controversial. Now, the most troublesome state flag, and in fact the flag that already has one foot in the grave at the time I'm recording this, is the flag of Mississippi. As you can see, it just openly has a big Confederate cross on it, the only state flag to do so. The Confederate cross, or the Confederate battle flag, is of course the main symbol of the short-lived slaveholders' republic, known as the Confederate States of America, that existed in the U.S. South for almost exactly 4 years, from 1861 to 1865. These days, however, the flag has become so controversial that I am actually a little bit nervous even showing it in this video. I've heard it said that YouTube is starting to demonetize videos that display it. Mississippi redesigned their state flag to include the Confederate cross in the 1890s as a show of defiance to the federal government in the aftermath of the Reconstruction era that came after the end of the U.S. Civil War, which, as we shall see, they were hardly alone in doing. And the Mississippi flag became more and more controversial as the years went on, particularly after the dismantling of racial segregation in the 1960s, which heralded a sharp rise in the economic and political power of black Mississippians. But conservative white Mississippians stayed very loyal to the flag, which made the whole flag debate one of the most racially and politically polarizing issues in the state. In 2001, the Mississippi government attempted to bring closure with a compromise solution. There was a big statewide referendum that asked Mississippians if they wanted to keep the flag or replace it with this one, which was actually a Confederate flag as well, but was less known and therefore less offensive. And the Mississippians voted massively in favor of the status quo. And that was considered the end of that particular discussion for about 20 years. But of course now we are in a very different moment. And in the wake of the George Floyd protests, the ordinarily very conservative Mississippi government has moved swiftly to bring final closure to the flag debate once and for all. Supported by Governor Tate Reeves, a very conservative Republican, on June 28th, 2020, the 2 houses of the Republican-dominated Mississippi state legislature voted by large margins to finally just ditch the Confederate cross flag. A government committee has been tasked with designing a new Mississippi flag, and they will keep holding referendums until one of them is approved by the voters. So let's all keep our eye on that. Breaking news! I'm just receiving word that Governor Reeves has signed legislation immediately withdrawing the Mississippi flag from public use. It will be replaced on an interim basis by this flag, seen here, until such matters can be further resolved. Alright, now a very similar story took place in Georgia. But first let me tell you the full story behind this flag, which I showed you earlier. Even though the cross flag is the most famous symbol of the Confederacy, during the 4 short years that the Confederate States of America existed, they actually cycled through a number of different flags without ever settling on one permanently. This is why a lot of flag spurts will tell you that the Confederate cross is really much more of a symbol of post-war Confederate nostalgia than something that would have necessarily been all that sentimentalized in its own time. I mean, like I said, the Confederacy was only around for 4 years, and all of those 4 years were dominated by the Civil War. They weren't exactly churning out a lot of souvenirs. In any case, this was the flag first adopted by the rebel government of the Confederacy in 1861. It became known as the Stars and Bars, even though I know that people sometimes call the Confederate Cross the Stars and Bars too. When Fort Sumter famously fell to the Confederate rebels on April 13th, 1861, This was the flag they raised over it. This fact inspired several of the component states of the Confederacy to adopt their own stars and bars flags as well, including Florida, Tennessee, and North Carolina. When the Civil War ended, these flags were all abandoned. But then, when the period of post-war Reconstruction ended in 1870, other states took the opportunity to adopt new Confederate-inspired flags of their own. It was like flag whack-a-mole. One such state was Georgia, which in 1879 adopted a stars and bars inspired flag that looked like this, though they would proceed to alter that thing on the left side a few times. What happened next is an interesting case study in the famous party switch of US political history. As we know, in the Civil War days, the Democratic Party was the party associated with white conservative Southerners, while the Republicans were a more diverse and progressive party associated more with the North. People have made like a billion videos on this topic. But anyway, by the mid-20th century, this dynamic was still in place. And in 1956, as the civil rights movement was beginning to gain traction across the South, the Democrat-controlled government of Georgia decided to do something very provocative as an act of protest. They decided to make their state flag even more Confederate-y by adding a big Confederate cross. By the 1990s, however, the Democrats had become increasingly liberal, and in 1992, the Georgia Democrats officially came out in opposition to the presence of the cross on the flag, in a famous speech delivered by Democrat Governor Zell Miller. As the governor put it,
"What we fly today is not an enduring symbol of our heritage, but the fighting flag of those who wanted to preserve a segregated South in the face of the civil rights movement. It is time we shake completely free of that era. We need to lay the days of segregation to rest, to let bygones be bygones, and rest our souls."
This position, in turn, made the Georgia Democrats increasingly unpopular with the state's white conservative voters, who were drifting towards the Republican Party as it became more conservative. In fact, the backlash that Governor Miller got from white conservatives on this issue sort of warped him politically for the rest of his life. He tried to compensate by becoming super conservative on every other issue, and even endorsed George W. Bush for president in 2004. But anyway, Miller never actually got around to changing the flag. Instead, that became the task of his Democrat successor, Roy Barnes. In 2001, Governor Barnes persuaded the Democrat-controlled Georgia state legislature to ditch the entire Confederate-inspired flag and instead adopt this one. Although this flag in turn became a sort of infamous abomination in its own right. And in the end, the Georgia Democrats' newfound obsession with flag changing wound up being one of the final straws that killed off the party for good. In 2002, Barnes was voted out, and Georgia got its first Republican governor and Republican-controlled state senate since the Civil War. And the new Republican government organized a big statewide referendum that pitted the Barnes flag against a new Stars and Bars inspired flag. And the Stars and Bars won by a huge margin. From the Georgia perspective, this outcome was seen as finally putting the whole flag debate to rest, because the new flag, even though it was Confederate-inspired, was not as provocative and offensive as the 1956 one, but it was still opposed by black activists, which makes me think that it is probably due for another round of revision. Now, this is the flag of Arkansas. It was created in 1913, and I think everyone can agree that it is clearly supposed to evoke the design of the Confederate cross. However, officially, this is just a giant coincidence, which is, I think, an interesting test of how seriously we are supposed to take official explanations versus obvious intent. Officially, there is a big diamond to celebrate the Arkansas diamond industry, and there are 25 stars because Arkansas was the 25th state to join the US, and it is red, white, and blue because America. Now, this flag has become controversial because of its Confederate symbology, but maybe not in the way you might expect. When Arkansans argue in favor of making a new flag, what they usually focus in on are these 4 little stars here. For you see, these 4 stars are supposed to represent the 4 nations that have governed the territory that is now Arkansas's over the years: Spain, France, the United States of America, and the Confederate States of America. The 4th star was added in 1923 and was somewhat infamously affirmed in 1987 by Governor Bill Clinton. Though reaffirming something is not the same as coming up with the idea in the first place, and there's no truth to the urban legend that adding the fourth star was all Bill Clinton's idea. But in any case, the fourth star has become a convenient pretext for those who would like to see the Arkansas flag get an overhaul. It is the loose string you can pull to get the rest of it unraveled. The current governor of Arkansas, Republican Asa Hutchinson, says that he is, in theory, in favor of changing the flag. But it sounds like this could wind up being another Georgia-style situation between the maximalist reformers and the minimalist reformers. The current minimalist proposal is to just change the official meaning of the fourth star, so it now represents the Native Americans who governed Arkansas before the Europeans arrived, while the maximalist position would be to change the entire flag in some more dramatic way that would affect how it looks, rather than just what it represents. So we shall see how that goes. Now, the two most ambiguous cases are the flags of Alabama and Florida. Both feature gigantic crosses, and like with the Arkansas flag, it is not exactly going out on a limb to think that there might have been some intentionality here with these two former states of the Confederacy choosing to go with this particular symbolism. But unlike the Arkansas situation, their plausible deniability is a little stronger. For you see, this was the flag of the Habsburg dynasty in Spain, the Spanish dynasty that presided over the colonization of the southern half of North America in the 16th and 17th centuries. And after Spanish rule ended, this flag, which is sometimes known as the Cross of St. Andrew, remained a popular symbol in the American South. It is said to have been one of the inspirations for the design of the Confederate battle flag. So when it comes to the current flags of Alabama and Florida, a lot of it comes down to what symbolism do you choose to see. Both flags were created after the Civil War and after Reconstruction, so you can't exactly say that they have this really long history. The Alabama flag was adopted in 1895 and the Florida one in 1900, but there's no law or anything that says that their crosses are supposed to represent the Confederate cross, but still. But on the other hand, Alabama, and especially Florida, do in fact have a significant period of their history under the Spanish rule of the Habsburgs. So it can be argued that having a flag based on the cross of St. Andrew is not intended to honor their dark history of Confederate rule, but rather their dark history of Spanish colonialism. So let us see who wins this argument. Now, obviously, this moment that we are in right now can be a pretty intimidating one, a moment in which there is suddenly a lot of pressure for everyone to have super insightful opinions on history and politics and all the rest. And if you are looking for a shortcut to improve your own education, may I suggest today's video sponsor, Blinkist. Blinkist is a fantastic app that gives you access to condensed summaries of over 3,000 nonfiction books, either through written recaps or podcast-style recordings. It is a great way for you to get the taste of a book before you decide to buy it, or simply to get the gist of something that you've always wanted to read but never got around to. They got a number of important books in their library that are particularly worth reading in this current moment, such as Hidden Figures, the famous book about the pioneering work done by the black female engineers at NASA, or the seminal work of African American sociology done by W.E.B. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Folk. Recently, they have been getting into the audiobook scene as well. I was looking at this one, Barracoon, which is the incredible true story of one of the last enslaved Africans who was brought over to America, died in 1935. Anyway, the first 100 people who click on the link in the thing below will get unlimited access to everything Blinkist has to offer for 7 days. You will also get 25% off if you decide you want to go with a full membership. Since I've started pitching them, a number of my friends have started to use Blinkist, and it is honestly one of the sponsors I get the most positive feedback for. So don't delay, join their millions of users today. Now, there are some controversial flags in the US that have nothing to do with slavery or the Civil War. For example, the flag of Massachusetts has come under increasing fire for what is seen as insensitively colonialist symbology, with a Native American chief standing under the menacing sword-wielding arm of a white man. But if you had to wager which state flags are least likely to survive the 2020s, I think you'd have to go with these 5. I mean, it's already sort of happening. According to this story in the Alabama Yellowhammer, in 2016, all 5 of these flags were removed from this special Hall of Flags area in the US Capitol building because their Confederate symbolism was starting to offend the other Congresspeople, which then led to every state's flag getting taken down in the name of fairness. So you can see that the controversial nature of these flags is getting so strong that it is starting to develop its own gravitational force capable of pulling down other flags with it. So here is my parting question for you. Do you come from a state with a controversial flag? And if so, how popular would you say it is? Is it something you think people are very emotionally attached to, and you often see flying in your community? Or is it a more obscure and unloved thing that you think no one would really care about if it went away? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you all next week. Oh yes, and just a reminder, I am still running a Kickstarter to raise funds for this fun cartoon book I am making, all about Canadian culture monsters. Be sure to check it out.